Ireland Was Born in Me by Paul Barrett of Padstow 2211. Narrated by Lex Marinos. In the early evening of 11 July 1924, in the darkened front room of my home in Hegarty Street, Glebe, I lay in bed, awaiting my departure from this physical world. As a Catholic, I've been fortunate that our local Franciscan priest was able to visit me earlier in the day and hear my confession and give me the last rites. As I reflect upon my life, I feel comfortable that when the time comes to meet my God, He will hopefully not judge me too harshly. It's been an interesting life, and although at times I've experienced the harshness and undeserved ill treatment by some people because of my national origins and religion, I've accepted it and utilized it to strengthen me. I was born in January 1866 in Ballyconnell, County Cavan in Ireland. I was one of 11 children, and although we were poor in material possessions, like many of our Catholic neighbours, we were rich in the love we shared with our parents. My father leased a small land holding from an English lord, where he grew potatoes as his main crop. Historically, dating back to the reign of Henry VIII, Ireland's land had been controlled by a minority of Protestant Anglo-Irish elite. My father told me that although in the majority, the tyranny experienced by his Catholic Irish ancestors had moderated by the 1840s. Even so, they were still treated as second-class citizens. Just prior to my birth, in the period between 1845 and 1850, the potato crops in Ireland were hit by a crop disease called the potato blight, and as this was the primary source of food, Ireland was plunged into what was later described as the Great Famine. Our family struggled through this period, and many of our neighbours and relatives perished through starvation. My older brothers travelled to Liverpool in the hope of finding work to help support the family, but they returned without success. One of my brothers said that at one factory he visited looking for a job, they had a sign posted outside which said, "Workers wanted. Irish and dogs need not apply." Disillusioned, he returned home. Later, he and another brother emigrated with some of his sisters to New York. Although this physically separated the members of our family, we stayed in contact with each other by mail, and where possible, my siblings made short visits back to Ireland. The reduction of family members at home also assisted my parents to manage their limited resources. In 1884, under a scheme called assisted migration, I also said farewell to my parents, siblings, and extended family, and migrated to Australia. I was to be the only member of my family to move to this country, and I've never regretted not following in the footsteps of my other siblings to the USA. I saw Australia as a land of great promise, and it's not disappointed me. I know that I leave my children and their children to a better future in this land. My mother gave me a letter of introduction to a distant relative of hers living in Sydney with an assurance that they would look out for me, but alas, this did not eventuate. They were likely busy making their way in this new country, and I suspect they did not want to be burdened by a newcomer from the old country. I hold no hard feelings towards them. Sometimes operating on your own initiative makes you a stronger person, or so I've come to believe. A potato farmer from Ireland does not have many skills to offer an employer, but the one thing I was good at was working with horses. Not long after arrival, I obtained a job working as a carter for a company owned by a fellow Irishman from Killaloe in County Clare named William Mealy. Sadly, 4 years after my arrival, William Mealy passed away, but thankfully, his carting company was taken over by his wife, Mary Ryan, who was also an Irish immigrant from Clonaspoy in County Tipperary. When I look back on these early days, I reflect on the fact that it was my Irish compatriots who extended a welcoming hand. In those years, although not so much now, there still existed a spillover animosity to the English Protestants towards the Irish Catholics. As I say these days, Australia is such a mix of nationalities and religions that the binding glue that holds our society together is our Australian identity. I married my wife, Ellen Mealy, the daughter of my employer, in 1901. Ellen was born in Australia, as were my 6 children. My dearest Ellen used to say to our children, "I wasn't born in Ireland, but Ireland was born in me." And I would tell my children to live by their mother's words and pass them down through the generations of our family to come. It's important to be proud of both where you were born as well as your heritage. I've spent more of my life in Australia now than where I was born. My wife and I have lived most of our lives in the Glebe, Leichhardt area of Sydney, which, when I arrived in Sydney, used to be a largely Irish enclave, but in recent times we've seen the arrival of some immigrants from Italy. I'm sure they, like myself, will experience a degree of animosity from the ignorant minority, but in time they'll also be embraced as Australians. This is what future generations of migrants will also experience. Unfortunately, I'll not be here to offer advice or witness this evolution of our society. As I lie here in this darkened room with my dearest Ellen and children and the murmur of prayers in my ear, I'm feeling satisfied and complete as I near the end of the journey from my Australian home to my eternal and spiritual home. The end.